Camila Rios thought her birthday would be a special moment, but she never imagined it would end in the worst humiliation of her life in front of her husband's family. She was ridiculed, despised, and worst of all, betrayed by the person who should have protected her the most. What happened that night led her to make a decision that would change her life forever: to escape. It wasn't easy, and facing the truth was even more painful. What really happened? How far did the abuse go? And how did Camila manage to get her life back? Stay tuned until the end to find out, and tell me in the comments where in Mexico or the world you are watching this story from. Camila Rios looked at her reflection in the mirror of the small bathroom in her apartment. She smoothed out the red dress she had carefully chosen for the occasion. It wasn't too flashy, but it highlighted her dark skin and made her dark eyes shine a little more intensely. It was her birthday, and although it wasn't the ideal celebration, she tried to stay positive. Leonardo had insisted that it was best to spend it at his mother Magdalena Flores's house. It would be a family dinner, nothing out of the ordinary, he had told her in that indifferent tone he used when he wanted to end a conversation. Camila had agreed, although deep down, it made her uncomfortable. Magdalena had never treated her with affection, but she still had hope that things would improve over time. "Ready?" Leonardo asked from the living room, in the indifferent tone he used when he wanted to end a conversation. Camila had agreed, although deep down, it made her uncomfortable. Magdalena had never treated her with affection, but she still hoped that things would improve over time. "Ready?" Leonardo asked from the living room, checking his cell phone without paying too much attention to her. "Yes," she replied, with a forced smile. They left the apartment, and the walk to Magdalena's house was silent. Camila looked out the window, feeling the knot in her stomach tightening with every street they passed. Magdalena's house was large, one of those old buildings with thick walls and ornate decorations. Camila had always felt out of place there, as if the house itself reminded her that she did not belong in that world. Upon entering, she was greeted with a quick glance from Magdalena, who did not even bother to hide her disdain. "Oh, you're here," said coldly. "I thought you were going to be later." Camila forced another smile. She hadn't expected a hug or effusive congratulations, but she hadn't expected such a dry welcome either. Some of Leonardo's relatives were already in the living room: his aunt, 2 cousins, and his older brother with his wife. They all greeted her politely, but without much enthusiasm. They went to the dining room, where the table was already set. Camila sat next to Leonardo, trying to convince herself that everything would be fine. At least she would try to enjoy the meal. But then, it started. "That dress is striking," Magdalena commented with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Camila felt the stares on her. Her skin heated up, but she tried to ignore it. "I like it," she replied. Sure, but with your body type, maybe something less tight would suit you better," the woman added, cutting a piece of meat with absolute calm. Camila felt a small prick in her chest. It wasn't the first time Magdalena had made comments like that. She decided not to respond and to concentrate on her plate. "How's work going?" Leonardo's aunt asked suddenly, trying to change the subject. "Well, I'm still at the advertising agency," she replied with a grateful smile for the change of topic. "Oh, really?" Magdalena narrowed her eyes. "And how long do you plan to stay there? Because to tell you the truth, it doesn't seem like you're making any progress. You've been doing the same thing for years." Camila put her fork down on the table. She felt Leonardo's gaze on her, but said nothing. "I like my job," she replied firmly. "I don't see the need to change it. I've always believed that the role of a married woman is different." Magdalena sighed exaggeratedly. "Of course, every generation has its own ideas." A slight laugh rippled around the table. It wasn't open, but it was palpable. Camila clenched her jaw. "I like Camila working," Leonardo said suddenly. For a second, Camila felt relieved, but it was fleeting. "It helps with the expenses," he added with a mocking smile. The laughter increased. Camila felt her stomach shrink. She wanted to respond, but she knew that if she did, everything would get worse. She took a deep breath. "And how is your cooking, Camila?" Leonardo's brother's wife asked with genuine curiosity. "Genuinely?" Camila was about to answer when Magdalena let out a dry laugh. "Cook? Oh my God, she can barely make rice." Leonardo has lost weight since they got married, and not because he's on a diet, but because he doesn't even eat well. The laughter was louder this time. Camila felt tears burning in her eyes. She looked at Leonardo, expecting something, but he just smiled amusedly. "It's true, Mom," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "But hey, nobody's perfect." Camila looked down. She wanted to leave. She wanted to run away from there, but she couldn't. "Tell me something, Camila." Magdalena put her fork down on the table and looked at her with a cold smile. "Do you really think you're the woman Leonardo deserves?" The silence was absolute. Camila felt her heart pound. Everyone was waiting for her answer. Her birthday, her night, had turned into a public humiliation, and no one did anything to stop it. The air in the room became heavy. No one dared to break the uncomfortable silence that lingered after Magdalena's question. Camila swallowed, feeling a lump in her throat that barely allowed her to breathe. All eyes were on her, expectant, as if waiting to see how she would react to this affront. Her trembling hand squeezed the napkin on her lap. She instinctively looked for Leonardo with her eyes, hoping that at least he would say something to defend her, change the subject, do anything to rescue her from that torture. But her husband simply picked up his glass of wine and drank with the calmness of someone who saw absolutely nothing wrong with what had just happened. "Well," Magdalena's voice rose again, breaking the silence with a false sweetness. "Aren't you going to answer, Camila?" Camila felt a tremor pain run through her hands. Her skin burned. Her chest rose and fell with each ragged breath. She wanted to get up and run away from there, but her legs wouldn't move. "Mom, please," said Leonardo, although his tone was not reproachful, but rather like a son who was annoyed because his mother was insisting on something that seemed irrelevant to him. Magdalena smiled and looked at the others as if they were accomplices to a joke. "I just want to understand why we're all here. We all know that my son has always been a successful, intelligent, hard-working man with a bright future." Camila felt the venom in every word. And of course, when I met Camila, I thought, well, she's not what I expected from my son, but maybe with time she'll adapt. The low laughter of some family members made Camila feel the blood rushing through her veins. But years have passed, and honestly, I don't see that happening. Magdalena continued in her deliberately slow tone, savoring every word. "I don't see that you've changed. Camila still doesn't know how to behave at a family dinner, doesn't know how to dress for a formal occasion, and well, not to mention how you take care of your husband." "Ma'am, please," Leonardo's aunt interjected, uncomfortable and nervous. But Magdalena barely glanced at her. She wasn't finished. Camila pressed her lips together, knowing that if she spoke, her voice would break. "I don't know," Magdalena sighed, and turned her gaze to Leonardo with a condescending smile. "Sometimes I wonder if you're really happy, son." Leonardo looked down at his plate as if the question were unimportant. "Of course I am, Mom," but he didn't sound convinced, and that was the worst part. Camila felt her chest tighten even more. Really? He thought that. Really? He regretted about choosing her. "Well, if you say so." Magdalena shrugged, but her smile showed that she didn't believe a word her son had just said. "Although, honestly, I don't know what you saw in her." Camila felt a lump in her throat. "But anyway, I don't get involved in your affairs," the woman continued, pouring herself more wine with absolute calm. "I just say what I see." And the worst part was that no one stopped her. No one got up from the table to defend Camila. No one changed the subject with the urgency of someone who knew they were crossing a line. It was as if everyone in that house knew their place and understood that Magdalena Flores had the power to humiliate anyone without consequence. Camila then said to Leonardo's brother's wife with a tense smile, "Would you like some more salad?" It was a crude attempt to take her out of the spotlight, but Camila could no longer anymore. She got up from the table. Everyone looked at her. Her body was shaking. Her breathing was unstable. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw her wine glass against the wall and tell them all that they were cowards, that they were cruel, that no one in that house had the right to treat her like that. But her pride prevented her from breaking down in front of them. So instead, she picked up her purse with trembling hands and looked at Leonardo. "I'm leaving," she said. Her husband looked at her with a gesture of annoyance. "Don't make a scene, Camila." But this wasn't a scene, it was dignity, and Camila couldn't keep losing it. Camila felt her body burning with pent-up rage. The air in the room was thick and suffocating, and although the atmosphere was filled with an uncomfortable silence after her statement, not a single word of support was heard, not a single voice to stop her, or at least make her feel that someone in that house understood her pain. Leonardo looked at her with annoyance. He didn't seem ashamed or upset with his mother, but irritated with her, as if her reaction were exaggerated, as if she were ruining the evening with her whims. Camila pressed her lips together. Her husband, the man who promised to care for and love her, the man who swore to be her partner, just looked away toward his plate, picking up his glass of wine with the same indifference with which one ignores an annoying noise. "Don't make a drama out of it," Leonardo repeated in a condescending, almost mocking voice. Camila's heart sank. Not only was he not defending her, he was ridiculing her pain. "Drama," she repeated with a lump in her throat, unable to believe what she had just heard. Her husband let out a slight laugh and shook his head, as if he were fed up. "Yes, a drama. Why do you always have exaggerate everything?" Camila felt shame wash over her. Her skin burned, but this time it wasn't just anger. It was humiliation. All eyes at the table were on her, watching her as if she were a spoiled child making an unnecessary scene. Magdalena herself smiled with satisfaction, that triumphant expression that said, of course she knew exactly what she was doing. "You see, son," said her mother-in-law with false concern. "She's always been like that. She takes everything so seriously. The younger generation doesn't know how to control their emotions." Subtle laughter rippled around the table. Camila felt a knot forming in her stomach. "I don't have to put up with this," she said, her voice trembling. "And what exactly are you putting up with?" asked Magdalena, feigning confusion. "Telling you the truth? Giving you advice so you can improve? For God's sake, girl, don't be so sensitive." Camila closed her eyes for a second, feeling her pulse racing. She wanted to scream, demand respect, ask Leonardo why he allowed her to be treated this way, but when she opened her mouth to speak, her husband beat her to it. "It's just that Camila has always had a hard time accepting criticism," he said with a mocking smile. Camila felt the ground opening up beneath her feet. Not only was he not defending her, he was mocking her. Leonardo took a sip of wine and looked at her with a weary expression, as if she were the one ruining the evening with her attitude. "Whenever someone says something she doesn't like, she gets like this," he continued. "She gets angry. She gets offended." He looked at her with a weary expression, as if she were the one ruining the evening with her attitude. "Whenever someone says something she doesn't like, she gets like this," he continued. "She gets angry. She gets offended. She makes a scene, but instead of getting so upset, wouldn't it be better to listen and learn?" Camila felt her chest fill with anguish. "Learn what?" Camila asked, her voice breaking. "Learn to put up with your mother insulting me to my face. Learn to keep quiet while you laugh with her." Leonardo snorted in exasperation. "No one is insulting you, Camila. You're just overreacting." The room filled with low murmurs. Magdalena sighed. "In my face. Learning to keep quiet while you laugh with her?" Leonardo snorted in exasperation. "No one is insulting you, Camila. You're just exaggerating." The room filled with low murmurs. Magdalena sighed theatrically, as if she were truly disappointed. "Oh, son, I don't know what we're going to do with her," she said with feigned sadness. "If she reacts like this just because I give her a couple of pieces of advice, imagine how difficult it must be to live with her at home." More laughter. Camila felt her stomach shrink. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe that Leonardo would allow this. She couldn't believe that he himself would join in. A part of her, the part that still had the absurd hope that her husband would have a little decency, hoped that he would react, that he would stand up and say that enough was enough, that he would defend the woman with whom he shared his life, but he didn't. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked at her with annoyance. "Sit down, Camila," he said in a dry, impatient tone. "Don't make a scene." She felt tears burning in her eyes. She finally understood. She was alone, completely alone in that house. Camila felt her pulse pounding in her ears. Her breathing was agitated and ragged. Indignation, shame, and rage mixed in her chest, forming a knot so tight that she could barely swallow. Leonardo's gaze remained fixed on her, laden with impatience, as if he were dealing with a capricious child who didn't know when to stop. "Sit down, Camila," he repeated, this time more harshly. But she couldn't, not after everything she had just heard. Not after seeing the triumphant smile on Magdalena's face, the mockery in the eyes of her relatives, she couldn't stay still after being humiliated, belittled, and ridiculed at the table, as if her dignity were worthless. She responded in a low but firm voice. Leonardo frowned. "What do you mean? No, I'm not going to sit down," she repeated, feeling her whole body tremble, but not giving in. "I'm not going to keep listening to this. I'm not going to stay in a house where they mock me and disrespect me." Leonardo let out a dry laugh and looked at his mother as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Magdalena, of course, looked amused. "You see what I mean?" the woman commented with scorn. "She doesn't know how to behave. She's nothing but a drama queen." Camila felt a twinge in her stomach. It's not drama, it's respect. Something that clearly doesn't exist here. For a moment, a brief moment, the atmosphere changed. The smiles disappeared from the faces of those present and was replaced by something else. Discomfort. Because now Camila was no longer just defending herself. Now she was confronting them, and people like them didn't like someone like her standing up to them. Leonardo slammed his wineglass down on the table. "You can calm down," he snapped, in the authoritative tone he used when he wanted to assert himself. But Camila didn't calm down. She turned, grabbed her bag, and prepared to leave. "I'm not staying in this house a second longer." Leonardo stood up abruptly. She ignored him and walked toward the door. "Don't go." Camila felt Leonardo grab her arm. It was a strong grip, too strong. "Let go of me," she demanded, trying to break free, but he didn't let go. It all happened in a second. Leonardo pulled her violently. Camila lost her balance, and before she could react, she felt the push. It wasn't just a simple movement to stop her. It wasn't a clumsy attempt to hold her back. It was a push full of rage. Her body staggered backward, and the blow was inevitable. Her hip hit the corner of the table with a sharp sound, and a second later, her back hit the floor. The impact shook her entire body, and then silence. The heaviest, most cruel, and terrifying silence she had ever heard in her life. The conversation stopped. The laughter disappeared. Everyone was watching. Everyone had seen it, but no one said anything. If you were in Camila's place in this scene, what would you do? Write your thoughts in the comments. Maybe you'll empower someone. No one moved. Camila blinked, disoriented, feeling the sting of the blow spread through her body. Her breathing was agitated, ragged. She brought a hand to her hip and felt the sharp pain where the wood had left a mark. And then, with her ears ringing, she heard Magdalena's voice. "For God's sake, Leonardo," she sighed, the woman without the slightest emotion in her tone. "Be more careful, will you?" Camila looked up. Magdalena wasn't worried. She wasn't outraged. She wasn't horrified that her son had just pushed his wife in front of everyone. She was annoyed. Annoyed that the scene had gotten out of her control. Annoyed that perhaps dinner had been ruined. Leonardo ran a hand through his hair, visibly upset, but not because he felt guilty. Not because it hurt him to have hurt her. He wasn't upset because now he looked like the villain of the story. "I told you, Camila." His voice was cold, without a hint of remorse. Always exaggerating everything. Camila felt her heart break into pieces. She looked around, searching for a glance, a gesture, a single sign that someone else in that house understood that what had just happened was an atrocity. But no one did anything. Not Leonardo's aunt, not his brother, not his wife, no one. They were all there with tense faces, their hands on the table, their mouths shut. The message was clear. This was nothing new. This did not surprise him. This was something that had happened before, and Camila felt a cold certainty run down her spine. If she stayed with Leonardo, if she continued to allow this, next time it would be worse. Camila remained on the floor. The pain in her hip was sharp, but she ignored it. Her whole body was shaking, not only from the impact, but from something worse. The humiliation, the helplessness. the disgust of realizing that she was alone, completely alone. Her breathing was rapid and erratic, her hands clinging to the floor as if trying to find stability in a world that had suddenly become unstable, as if the floor beneath her was the only thing that could still hold her up. But what hurt the most was not the blow, it was the reaction of the others, or rather, the lack of it. Leonardo's relatives were there, sitting motionless, doing nothing. Their expressions were a mixture of discomfort and resignation, but none of them stood up, none of them raised their voices. Not even Leonardo's aunt, who had tried to calm things down earlier, dared to look her in the eye, as if it were normal, as if seeing a woman on the floor after having been pushed by her husband in the middle of dinner wasn't reason enough to intervene. Camila felt nauseous. She took a deep breath. She couldn't stay there, not for another second. She forced herself to get up. Her body protested in pain, but she didn't stop. She grabbed her purse from the back of the chair and with trembling hands began to search for her cell phone inside it. "What do you think you're doing?" Leonardo asked in a tone of disbelief. She didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. She headed for the door. "Camila, don't start," Leonardo said, standing up abruptly and taking a step toward her. "You're not going anywhere." Camila felt him approaching, and her body reacted before her mind did. She quickly backed away, as if she were suddenly facing a dangerous animal. Leonardo frowned. "Don't exaggerate," he said in a low voice, laden with impatience. "You know I didn't mean to hurt you." Camila laughed. It was a harsh, dry, broken sound. "You didn't mean to hurt me," she repeated, her voice full of disbelief. "You pushed me, Leonardo, in front of everyone." Leonardo clenched his jaw. "It was an accident," he said impatiently, but clearly. "You had to make a scene." Camila felt a chill. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe he was still trying to justify it. "Let her go, son," Magdalena intervened, as if she were talking a spoiled child who needed a little space to calm down. "If he wants to leave, let him go. Let's see how long his tantrum lasts." Camila closed her eyes tightly. She couldn't take it anymore. Every second she spent in that house, it was another stab at her dignity. She clumsily opened the door and went out. The night hit her with an icy wind, but she didn't care. She hurried down the front steps, feeling the cold asphalt beneath her heels. Her legs were still shaking, her heart was racing, and her mind was a whirlwind of chaotic thoughts. But the only thing she could focus on was one thing. She had to get out of there. She had to get as far away as possible. She heard footsteps behind her. "Camila, Leonardo." Her stomach churned. She quickened her pace, but so did he. "Camila, stop making this bigger than it." The tone of his voice changed. He no longer sounded patient or condescending. He sounded furious, and Camila knew she couldn't let him catch up to her. She kicked off her heels and started running. The pavement was cold and rough under her bare feet, but fear propelled her faster than the pain. Her purse bounced against her side. Her breathing was ragged. Her hair flew loose in the wind. She didn't look back. She had no plan, no idea where to go. But for the first time in a long time, she knew one thing for sure. She would never return to that house. To help these stories reach more people, like the video now, continue the story. Camila ran until her legs could no longer carry her, until her lungs burned, and the cold of the night penetrated her bones. Her bare feet were dirty and sore from contact with the rough pavement. But she didn't care. She just wanted to be far away, far from that house, far from Leonardo, far from those eyes that judged her without mercy. She stopped at a dark corner, leaning against a concrete wall as she tried to catch her breath. Her heart was still beating hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. The tears she had held back all night finally escaped, hot and silent, sliding down her cheeks. Uncontrollably, she took out her cell phone with trembling hands and unlocked the screen. She didn't have many options. She couldn't go to any of her friends' houses. Leonardo knew them all. He knew where they lived. He knew their numbers. If she tried to hide with one of them, he would find her. There was only one place left. She stared at the screen, her finger trembling over the name in her contact list. Dad. She hesitated. They hadn't spoken in months. Since she married Leonardo, their relationship had become distant. Manuel Rios never approved of her marriage, and Camila, Blinded by love and the need to prove she was capable of building her own life, she had distanced herself from him. She had convinced herself that her father was wrong, that he didn't understand, but now she wished she had listened to him. She took a deep breath and dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then Manuel's deep, tired voice answered on the other end of the line. Camila. The simple sound of her name in her father's voice caused all her control to... She let out a sob. Dad. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Where are you, Camila? She closed her eyes tightly, trying to hold back the tears. I don't know. On the street. I can't go home. She didn't need to say more. Manuel's voice changed instantly. Tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you right now. Camila looked around, found the nearest street name, and Manuel asked no further questions. Stay there. Don't move. I'm on my way. The call ended, and Camila felt a relief that almost made her collapse right there. Her father was coming to get her. She slumped down on the sidewalk, hugging her legs, shivering from the cold and the fear that still hadn't dissipated. Her thoughts were chaotic. She couldn't believe what had happened that night. It had all started as a family dinner and ended with her running away, barefoot, alone on the street, not knowing what to do with her life. The minutes felt like an eternity. Every time a car passed by, her heart stopped for a second, fearing it was Leonardo. But then a familiar car stopped in front of her, her father's old blue sedan. The driver's door opened suddenly, and Manuel Rios got out quickly. Camila felt a lump in her throat when she saw him. The years had aged him a little more than she remembered. His hair, once only sprinkled with gray, was now almost completely gray. His dark eyes were filled with concern as he searched for her in the darkness. When he saw her huddled on the sidewalk in her crumpled dress and bare feet, his expression changed to pain, anger, but above all, love, a love that needed no words. Daughter. He couldn't take it anymore. She stood up awkwardly and ran toward him, throwing herself into his arms like when she was a child and had had a nightmare. Manuel held her tightly, enveloping her in a protective embrace. I'm here, Camila, he murmured, stroking her hair. I'm here. Camila clung to him, as if her life depended on it, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Manuel held Camila in his arms for what seemed like hours, although in reality, it was only a few minutes. She couldn't let go of him. Her fingers clung to the fabric of his jacket, as if she feared that if she did, the world would collapse again. Her body was still shaking, and the muffled sobs against her father's chest were uncontrollable. It's over, sweetheart, Manuel whispered, but they both knew that wasn't true. Nothing had happened yet, and the hardest part was still to come. Manuel helped her into the car, carefully, turned on the heat, and without asking any questions, drove off. During the trip, Camila didn't say a word. She just stared out the window, watching the city lights blur by through the tears that still hadn't dried on her cheeks. When they arrived at her father's house, he got out of the car immediately and walked around to open the door for her. Camila looked at him with glassy eyes, not knowing what to do or what to say. Let's go inside, he said gently, but with a firmness that made it clear he would not take no for an answer. She nodded, feeling her body still tense, as if at any moment Leonardo might appear to drag her back to the hell she had escaped. Her father's house was small and warm, with cozy furniture. It smelled of coffee and old wood, a familiar aroma that brought her a pang of nostalgia. Camila went inside and collapsed onto the living room sofa. Manuel went to the kitchen and returned with a cup of hot tea. Drink this, he said. This will help you calm down. Camila took it in her trembling hands, feeling the comforting warmth against her cold skin, but she didn't drink. She couldn't, because deep down, she knew that nothing could calm the whirlwind inside her. Her father sat down in front of her and watched her patiently. Do you want to talk about what happened? Camila looked down. She didn't want to relive it. She didn't want to say it out loud, but she couldn't keep it to herself either. Leonardo. She nodded. He pushed me in front of everyone, in front of his mother, his brother, his cousins, and no one did anything. No one. Manuel closed his eyes for a second, as if he were holding back an impulse. Damn bastard, he muttered, but his voice wasn't filled with explosive anger. It was worse. It was a cold, contained anger. The kind of rage that isn't immediate, but builds up until it becomes an unstoppable force. Camila hugged herself. It's not the first time. The words escaped her lips before she could stop them. Manuel looked at her with a hardened expression. What did you say? Camila closed her eyes. It wasn't the first time he did something like that to me. The silence that followed was heavy. Manuel took a deep breath, got up from his seat, and walked around the room, trying to contain his fury. You're going to report him. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Camila looked up in surprise. Dad, I'm not. No buts, Camila. I'm not going to allow that guy to get away with what he's done to you. She bit her lip. What if it doesn't work? What if he doesn't? You're not alone, daughter, Manuel said firmly. This time, you're not alone. Camila felt the tears coming back. For so long, she had felt trapped, with no way out, no one to turn to, but her father was there. He had never abandoned her. Camila nodded slowly. Okay. And with those words, without knowing it yet, she had just taken the first step toward her freedom. Subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss real transformation stories. More to come. The following weeks were hell. Camila had to relive each of the abuses in a cold office at the prosecutor's office, where an agent looked at her with a frown as she typed on her computer. Why didn't you report it before? Camila felt a chill. I was afraid. The agent didn't react. She just kept typing. Do you have any evidence? Camila swallowed hard. I have text messages, conversations, some photos of the bruises. Well, that helps, she said, but it didn't sound like she really believed it would help. Camila felt fear wash over her again. What if Leonardo got away with it? What if no one believed her? But then she looked at her father, who was sitting next to her with a hard, unyielding expression, and she knew that this time he wouldn't let her be silenced. No matter how difficult the process was, no matter how many times she had to tell her story, Leonardo wouldn't get away with it. Not this time. The courtroom smelled of old paper, stale coffee, nerves, despair, and delayed justice. Camila sat in the courtroom with her hands clasped in her lap to hide the trembling that shook her inside. The air conditioning was too strong, but it wasn't the cold that made her skin crawl. It was the weight of everything that was about to happen in front of her. At the other table sat Leonardo, wearing a well-pressed dark gray suit with a perfectly tied tie. He looked exactly as she had seen him so many times before, impeccable, confident, with that arrogance she had hated so much. But now there was something else in his expression, something that hadn't been there the last time she saw him: contempt. Leonardo wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't worried. He was furious. Camila looked away and swallowed. She knew he thought all this was a charade, that she was exaggerating, that the justice system would never do anything against him, because in his sick mind, he had done nothing wrong. But this time, Camila would not be intimidated. She felt her father's firm hand squeezing hers in support. To her left, her lawyer was organizing the documents on the table, reviewing once again the text messages, the evidence, the photos of the bruises that Camila had hidden for years deep in her gallery, as if ignoring them would make them disappear. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone stood up. The prosecutor presented the charges: domestic violence, physical assault, psychological abuse. Camila felt her stomach shrink with each word, because hearing her story from someone else's mouth made her feel even more vulnerable, more exposed, as if every blow, every insult, every humiliation had been exposed to strangers who now held the most important decision of her life in their hands. Then it was her turn to speak. The judge looked at her seriously. Miss Rios, take the stand. Camila felt her legs buckle as she stood up and walked to the seat where she would have to give her testimony. When she turned to look at the courtroom, her gaze met Leonardo's. He was smiling, as if all this were a joke, as if he still thought she had no chance of winning. Camila clenched her fists and looked away. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She spoke of the first time he pushed her, how he apologized afterwards with tears in his eyes, swearing about the times he made her feel small, how he isolated her little by little, until one day she woke up and realized she had no one. She talked about the last night at her mother-in-law's house, how they humiliated her, how Leonardo pushed her so hard that she fell to the floor, and how no one, Absolutely no one did anything. Her voice trembled. Her eyes burned with held-back tears. But she didn't stop. Not this time. When she finished, the room was completely silent. The judge nodded and adjusted his glasses on his nose. "You may return to your seat, Miss Rios." Camila walked back, feeling exhausted, as if every word she had said had torn a piece of her soul away. She slumped into her chair, feeling her father take her hand again. Leonardo was the next to speak. His lawyer questioned him in a firm voice, but he responded with calm, with that suffocating confidence he had always had. "I never hurt her on purpose," he said with feigned indignation. "Camila has always been dramatic. She has a difficult temperament sometimes. When we argued, she would get aggressive. I was just trying to calm her down." Camila felt a chill. He said it so naturally, so coldly. "So you deny pushing your wife?" asked the prosecutor, without taking his eyes off him. Leonardo smiled. "I don't deny it. I say it was an accident. She tripped." Camila felt her stomach churn. It was as if she were reliving every conversation where he had made her doubt her own reality. "You're exaggerating. That never happened the way you say. If it did happen, it was because you provoked me. It had always been that way, and if she didn't stop him now, it always would be." The trial lasted for hours. Witnesses testified. Evidence was presented. But the most difficult part was when Leonardo's defense tried to legitimize it. "Miss Rios," Leonardo's lawyer said in a cold, calculating tone, "it is true that you never reported these alleged abuses until after you left your husband." Camila felt a lump in her throat. "Yes, it's true. If what you say is true, why didn't you go to the authorities before?" Silence. Camila looked the lawyer in the eye because she was afraid. The answer echoed in the room. "Afraid that no one would believe me. Afraid that they would try to make me look like the guilty party now." The lawyer paused but did not respond, because he knew he had nothing more to say. The trial continued hours later after an interminable recess. The judge returned with the verdict. Camila clenched her fists and felt her heart in her throat. The judge looked at Leonardo with a serious expression. "Leonardo Herrera, the court finds you guilty of the crime of domestic violence." The air in the room changed suddenly. Leonardo's face tensed, his confidence vanished. The judge continued speaking. Sentence, restraining order, criminal record. The weight of justice fell on him like an impossible-to-dodge wall. Camila let out a sigh. She didn't know she had been holding back. She had won for the first time in years. Leonardo no longer had power over her. The air in the courtroom felt dense and still, as if time had frozen at the precise moment the judge uttered the word Camila never thought she would hear: guilty. For a second, she couldn't react. Her ears were ringing, her whole body was rigid, her fingers clinging to the edge of the table, as if her mind still couldn't process what had just happened. She had won, after all. After years of silent humiliation, of screaming into her pillow, of bruises hidden behind makeup and excuses, after all the fear, after believing that no one would ever listen to her, she had won. The judge's voice continued to echo in the courtroom, but Camila was no longer paying attention. Her gaze was fixed on Leonardo, on the way his confidence had evaporated, on the way his jaw was tense, his hands clenched on the table. He barely moved, barely breathed. The man who had always made her feel small, weak, and insignificant was now the one who had no power, the one who could do nothing. "The sentence has been handed down," announced the judge. "The defendant will have a restraining order and will be registered in the domestic violence records." Leonardo's lawyer tried to appeal, but it was useless. Not this time. The judge banged the gavel, and with that sound, with that loud and final echo, it was all over. Camila felt the air return to her lungs, for the first time in years. She breathed without fear. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling, feeling everyone's gaze on her. Her father watched her with pride, with a contained emotion in his eyes that needed no words. She didn't think about it. She just threw herself into his arms. Manuel held her with the same strength with which he had received her the night she arrived at his house, broken and defeated. "You did it, daughter," he whispered against her hair. Camila closed her eyes, and allowed the tears, for the first time in a long time, were not of pain. They were of relief. They were of freedom. But when she separated from her father and looked around, when she saw the room slowly emptying, she felt something new in her chest. An emptiness, an abyss of uncertainty that hit her hard, because, as much as she had wanted it, as much as she had fought for it, she had no idea what to do with her life now. The following days were strange. She woke up, and she wasn't afraid. There was no one yelling at her. There was no one criticizing how she dressed, what she said, or what she did. But there was no routine either, after years of living in a world where her every move depended on Leonardo's moods. Now she had absolute freedom, and that terrified her. She tried to go back to her old job at the advertising agency, but sitting in front of the computer, reading emails, answering calls, everything felt meaningless, as if it weren't enough. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling that knot in her stomach that told her she hadn't found her place yet. Until one afternoon, while she was in her father's kitchen, it happened. She took some flour between her fingers and let it fall onto the table, watching it scatter in the air. She remembered when she was a child, and her mother taught her to make sweet bread on Sundays. She remembered the aroma of vanilla, the soft texture of the dough in her hands, and how happy she was in those moments. And then, for the first time since the trial, she smiled. She didn't know exactly how or if it would work, but in that instant she knew what she wanted to do. She wanted to start over. She wanted to create something with her own hands, something sweet, something of her own. The aroma of vanilla and cinnamon filled the kitchen, enveloping the air with a comforting warmth. Camila watched the soft dough in her hands, feeling its silky texture slip between her fingers. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt in control of something. It was a strange feeling. For so long, her life had been a series of decisions made by others, by Leonardo, by her mother-in-law, by fear. But now, the future was in her own hands. She was literally kneading her own destiny. Her father entered the kitchen and watched her silently for a moment before smiling. "You smell like a bakery." Camila let out a soft laugh, the first genuine one in a long time. "I hope that's a compliment." "The best kind," said Manuel, coming closer to look at the mixture. "What are you making?" Camila sighed, wiping some flour from her cheek with the back of her hand. "I don't know. Trying something new." Manuel looked at her tenderly. "Your mother would be proud." The comment took her by surprise. She felt a lump in her throat, but not from sadness, rather from something deeper, a connection to the girl she once was, the one who spent hours in the kitchen with her mother, watching her hands transform simple ingredients into something beautiful, something warm, something that brought joy. The days passed, and what began as a simple hobby became something more. Camila spent hours experimenting with recipes, reading baking books, watching tutorials, and writing down every mistake and every success in an old notebook she found in her father's house. The first cake she made was a disaster, too dry. The second was worse, but the third made Manuel close his eyes and murmur, "My God, this is incredible," with his mouth full. Camila smiled. Something inside her awakened, and then she knew this wasn't just an escape, it was her future. The following months were a whirlwind. Camila used what little savings she had to buy ingredients and utensils. She sold her first creations to her neighbors, then to her father's friends, then to acquaintances who came on recommendation. Little by little, her name began to spread by word of mouth. Orders increased, and her kitchen was no longer big enough. And one day, standing in front of a small shop for rent, with the keys in her hand and her heart beating fast in her chest, Camila understood that the time had come, the time to open her own bakery, to build something with her own hands, something that no one could take away from her. On opening day, the shop smelled of caramel and freshly brewed coffee. Camila paused at the entrance and looked around. The display cases sparkled with perfectly decorated cakes, fluffy cupcakes, and cookies that had the same homemade touch she remembered from her childhood. The logo in the window read her name, Dulce Refugio, Camila Riot's Bakery. She smiled. She had made it. She had survived. And finally, she was free.